patriotic, divergent. How can you really define what those are? You can't. When you have somebody who's like Tucker Carlson interviewing Putin and stepping up for the people, right? This is how it looks from the outside. Stepping away from a de facto government system, a totalitarian woke concept of ideology, control. You're just swapping one form of feudalism for the other. Like, do you not understand that Putin knows that his reach is now going into, he even talked about these Walmart walrus people in America, worthless. Now you go into their living rooms, and it's under the guise of conservatism, which I know that in his heart of hearts, Tucker Carlson knows that he's choosing the lesser of two evils, right? And it couldn't be further from the truth that all roads lead to globalism. In other words, there is no cure. It would be nice to be able to lean back and say, with your nice wavy hair, Tucker Carlson, acting as if you're aloof to certain ideas, but the truth is that you can't see past your own nose, man. And the fact that you're playing right into it. So by you trying to overthrow a faction in the government system that is abhorrently not doing its part and is going against, creating false laws, civic arms. That's where the U.S. Treasury comes from, the IMF, International Banking Federation, how the Rothschilds, is it a sign that we lost a Rothschild just 2 days ago on the 26th? We say we. There's no collective. There's no we. That's the point to this, is that once you say that you're only tearing down or taking down or attempting to take down the bad parts of a government system, now you have to get into the wet works of the fact that all of these wires are attached, or they're more like Venus systems, and you're going to invariably kill the organism. And so that's all right. We're going to start over again. And do you understand what that's saying? Like, it sounds like a byline and a simple, but that's what ends civilizations. And then you see others, we're at the end of civilization as we know it. And it all just repeats over and over again. When we get too close to the truth, the esoteric truth, and that's why decoding what I'm talking about is extremely important, because this information isn't even passed down through data sets, as I was explaining in the prior video. You're not going to be able to go in and look this up anywhere. In other words, you have to factor this through, and you should have been factoring this through all along. Since you were a youngin', since you were a child, and seeing the break in consistency, seeing how the people around you were saying one thing and doing the other, that even you were not able to follow through with and stay true and consistent to what you wanted versus what you invariably ended up doing physically. We live in a world that is keeping us from this esoteric truth that I'm talking about, that can only best be described, and even loosely at that. Even the hieroglyphic monad, John Dee's hieroglyphic monad, is only a descriptor of something that should be happening, the phenomenology of the soul, the war that's going on in each our souls, and that gets into who is each our. You'll find that many people are actually imposters, that they don't exist. Like I explained, that people who seem like they exist and that they're a part of this binary code sequence of existence They otherwise, through the succession, through the steps of the way, that there is a way. There was a misstep, and there was a false timeline created, and that's why things are so precisely laid out as to control that false timeline. That's what the World Trade Centers were about. That's what all of these cataclysms and war is about. And it doesn't make sense to us on the surface, but they are replaying the psychodrama, the narcissistic borderline psychodrama, right? They are replaying the gaslighting Stockholm incident over and over again. It's the same incident, the same story that's being told over and over again. The idea of a linear on-running time. There are different subsets of time, and Lee Smolin and other people in physics get into this. Fick time, AB time. There are many physicists who talk about different renditions, versions of time. Nietzsche and his flat time. All of them exist. All of those postulations exist. They exist as numerous as there are cryptocurrencies. And I know, I lose a lot of people describing this as cryptocurrencies, but it's the perfect description. You have a timestamp, a codified wallet address, a moment in time. You also have a contract that follows there. You have a moment. You have a documented moment. And either that moment is existing in real time, right? And what is real time? Well, the closest that we can get to real time isn't true time. It's not the time that's being used and the time that's being respected when you look at an atomic clock. It's not all the derivatives of that take off from that, and manipulate that true time. There is a pure time. There's a time that exists still where there was the perfection carried out, where there wasn't one misstep because things were so simple. There was no way to error. There was no want of thing. There was no false ideology or concept of choice. The choices were one. You saw the direction you had to go in. You took those steps. You knew what you had to do in survival. You made certain choices. Sure, you may have chosen to take an animal's life or to pick more berries and, be a scavenger, but those weren't break-offs from continuity. Those were choices, and the repercussions were shown, and there wasn't the false ideology, the ideation of going to a worthless job, sacrificing your children without even realizing you're doing that by putting them on meds, putting them in these inept school programs, and sending them off into a desperate life of solitude and sadness. No, you just thought this is the way. But once you started to realize, that the thoughts you were having deep inside, the inclinations that you had that you didn't listen to, where you were called oversensitive, maybe even crazy, the fact that you start to realize at some point, I need to listen to this. And what the voice is telling me, I'm not talking about any voice, I'm talking about that still, calm voice that tells you to go back to simplicity. It tells you to go back to principles. It tells you to go back to purity. It tells you things that don't really make sense at first, right? And then when you start to follow in another direction, you hear other voices. It's never one voice. I've heard that some people hear one voice. And that's where, when you're being led off to the left-hand path, sometimes people have followed this, and these are the narcissists, these are the borderlines. They followed that voice without questioning that voice from a very young age. They never questioned it. They never stepped this way instead of that way. They did what the voice told them to do, and so they have this very deep, intimate relationship with a particular, what Nathaniel Gillis talks about, where this entity seems to take on different characteristics, different voices, right? So eventually what they do is, once they call bullshit, which eventually happens, it's like, no, you're old and you've been living this way your entire life. You can't just break off from me. I am you. Like, do you see what you did when you were that age? And I told you what would happen if you pushed that kid over at the park, and then when the teacher got in your face and accused you, you just lied, and I told you everything was going to be okay. Well, it's a false timeline. And so this may seem like an abstract, but the false timeline is at war with the pure timeline. And there's even like I postulated, there's a true timeline that keeps track of all the events as they're occurring, right? And the fact that there's this break off, the true timeline starts to fractionate and break off. There's no way for it. It's almost like, I wouldn't call it thick time, but I would say thick time would be a good descriptor. But I'm not well versed enough with Lee Smollen's thick time to where I understand what that means wholly. But I will say that the default is the flat time track, and that when you're looking at like this substantiation of flat Earth, you're not talking about flat Earth as a physical constant or a construct. You're talking about flat time. And that's where I think people get broken off, where they start to look at the physics of certain things and they're going, and it's no more than saying that time exists on a disk, right? But then you start to see that disk as a corkscrew, and by sacrificing other people, you'll be able to jump over that and stay on the disk. So it's a false ideology, it's a false representation that you'll be able to stay within a time. And that's what gets people, is they look back at there's these bridges to the past that are created, where they look back at, they may have lost a parent or a loved one, they may have lost a part of themselves, there may have been something that really fractionated them, and they're afraid, they have this anxiety that they're going to lose everything that they were in the past. And you have to want to lose that, especially if you recognize it as false. But what this deceptive voice begins to talk to you about is that you can build a bridge to the past, that you can hang on to that false idea of yourself, that you can live forever, and it will ensure that you live forever. But what you don't realize at that time is that it's a trap, that you're actually creating a contract. And there's, just like it upholds no truths to you, you don't have to uphold anything to it. But it will remind you in different subtle ways, and sometimes very blatant ways, that we have a contract. And so by becoming your true self, which is just the first step into becoming your pure self, you go into pure time. But you're going to have to possibly face the fact that you don't really exist at all. And so this is the depth of Donnie Darko, and why, in my opinion, pretty much everything that Jake Gyllenhaal has done since that movie, in the hubris of his own ego, has never been anything that even came close to it, And to look back and to see that even when you play the part, you're being a sellout, Yeah.